Nobody
here.
disagrees with that, Senator, but raising taxes in order to do it?
Oh,
Why
my
is that
goodness.
the answer?
Oh, dear. Are you worried that billionaires are going to go hungry?
The moment that set everything in motion began with a seemingly ordinary exchange between a CNBC host and Zohran Mamdani. The atmosphere was charged, the lights unforgivingly bright, and the audience tuned in expecting another sharp, quick segment where ideas would clash but nothing unexpected would occur. Yet what unfolded went far beyond that. The host didn't just challenge Mamdani's talking points. He pressed in a way that exposed cracks in the Assemblyman's carefully curated public persona. It wasn't a casual disagreement or a simple point-counterpoint. It turned into a direct confrontation where Mamdani appeared cornered, his usual confidence slipping as the host dismantled his arguments live on air. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The discussion had started on familiar ground. Mamdani has often been known for his outspoken critiques of established financial systems, housing policies, and the balance between Wall Street and working-class communities. But the CNBC host, equipped with sharp data points and a tone that brooked no evasions, quickly shifted from polite back and forth to a forceful interrogation. Every claim Mamdani made about economic inequities or market manipulation was met with meticulously researched counterpoints. Rather than being allowed to float in the air unchallenged, his statements were pinned down and scrutinized under the harshest lens of financial expertise. What made this exchange so striking wasn't just the clash of ideologies, it was the dynamic that emerged between the two men. Mamdani, who has built his reputation on being uncompromising and fearless, found himself visibly rattled. The CNBC host didn't raise his voice or resort to theatrics. Instead, he maintained a cool, almost surgical calm that magnified the intensity. Viewers could sense the imbalance growing with each exchange. When Mamdani tried to pivot the conversation back to familiar talking points about systemic failures, the host would draw him back with hard numbers, pressing him to reconcile broad rhetoric with concrete evidence. It was the kind of moment that television producers dream of, because it was riveting not only for what was said, but for how it revealed the vulnerability of someone usually seen as commanding. As the conversation deepened, Mamdani's frustration grew more apparent. He attempted to reframe the questions, positioning himself as the voice of grassroots struggles, but the host never allowed him to rest on moral authority alone. Instead, he drilled into details. How would Mamdani's proposals actually work in practice? What would be the immediate economic trade-offs? Where exactly were the funds to come from? On television, where time is short and precision is everything, these questions carried enormous weight. Mamdani's responses came off less like carefully reasoned answers, and more like attempts to regain his footing in quicksand. For an audience accustomed to seeing him dominate forums with his fiery rhetoric, this visual shift was startling. The humiliation wasn't just in the words exchanged, it was in the optics. Television can be unforgiving when someone appears unsure, and Mamdani's slight hesitations, the narrowing of his eyes, and the occasional stumbles in phrasing were amplified tenfold by the cameras. Meanwhile, the host exuded composure, leaning forward at just the right moments, keeping his voice level, and giving the impression of complete control. The dynamic resembled a courtroom more than a news program, one side cross-examining, the other struggling to keep the narrative intact. What made the humiliation cut deeper was the symbolic nature of the setting. CNBC is not just any media outlet, it is a stage where financial narratives are shaped, where investors and policymakers tune in to gauge the pulse of economic discourse. For Mamdani to falter here, in the very heart of mainstream economic commentary, was more than just a personal stumble. It became a symbolic defeat, a moment when the insurgent voice of progressive critique looked less like a challenger to power and more like an unprepared outsider overwhelmed by the machinery of institutional expertise. Even those sympathetic to his platform couldn't help but acknowledge that the exchange highlighted weaknesses that had always lingered beneath the surface of his political persona. The implications of this event ripple far beyond a single interview. In politics, perception is often as important as policy, and Mamdani's image has thrived on being the fiery, unshakable crusader against inequality. To watch him falter under pressure introduced a new narrative, one in which he could be bested, one in which his confidence could be dismantled, and one in which his ideas might not withstand intense scrutiny outside of sympathetic spaces. Supporters may argue that he was unfairly cornered, But detractors seized upon the moment as validation of their long-standing critiques, that his vision, while inspiring, is built on shaky foundations when confronted with pragmatic realities. The humiliation also served as a reminder of the power imbalance between outsider politicians and mainstream financial media. For years, figures like Mamdani have relied on grassroots platforms and alternative channels to spread their message. But when brought into the lion's den of a network like CNBC, the rules change. It isn't enough to speak passionately about systemic injustice. One must also navigate a terrain dominated by data, projections, and a skepticism towards sweeping reforms. This mismatch of arenas exposed the challenge of translating activist-driven energy into policy credibility, especially under the bright glare of national media scrutiny. What lingers most about the incident is the sense of inevitability it carried once the exchange reached its crescendo. By the time the segment drew to a close, Mamdani looked drained, while the host appeared invigorated. The final moments crystallized the imbalance. The host summarizing with concise authority, Mamdani forced into nods that carried the weight of resignation more than agreement. The humiliation wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, precise, and undeniable. It was the kind of public unraveling that doesn't need to be shouted about, because the silence that follows says enough. For those observing closely, the event also underscored the fragility of political momentum built primarily on narrative power. Mamdani's strength has always been his ability to frame issues in stark moral terms, rallying support by invoking urgency and justice. But in a venue where nuance, trade-offs, and technical feasibility are relentlessly interrogated, that strength became a vulnerability. It raised difficult questions about how much of his platform could withstand not just ideological opposition, but practical dismantling by experts armed with a different set of tools. Yet the humiliation wasn't total annihilation. What it demonstrated instead was the steep climb that figures like Mamdani face when they attempt to bridge activist passion with policy-making pragmatism. The CNBC host didn't just humiliate him as an individual. He symbolized the broader resistance of entrenched institutions to disruptive narratives. That resistance is not merely ideological, it's tactical, rooted in the ability to demand precision where passion alone once sufficed. The incident stands as a cautionary tale, illustrating how the very qualities that propel an outsider to prominence can become liabilities under the glare of institutional scrutiny. The event remains a pivotal reminder of the stakes involved when insurgent voices step onto mainstream platforms. For Mamdani, the humiliation was not simply about losing an argument, it was about the stripping away of aura, the loss of control in a space where control is everything. For viewers, it was a rare moment of seeing an outspoken figure silenced not by censorship or dismissal, but by the relentless weight of interrogation. And for the broader political landscape, it served as an unmissable spectacle of how power dynamics play out when bold visions collide with the unforgiving machinery of televised debate. The image of that moment continues to resonate because it condensed so much into a single exchange. The fragility of populist rhetoric when cornered, the dominance of institutional authority, and the human vulnerability that emerges when confidence gives way to exposure. Mamdani may return to sympathetic audiences and rally once again with fiery words, but the memory of his televised humiliation stands as a testament to the challenges that await anyone who dares to cross into hostile territory without the armor of unshakable preparation. One of the overlooked elements in the televised clash was the audience itself. While the cameras focused on the verbal duel, the real drama was unfolding in the living rooms, offices, and trading floors where people were watching. For many viewers, this was their first real exposure to Zohran Mamdani in an environment that wasn't carefully chosen or sympathetic to his perspective. Instead of the usual rallies or community gatherings, they saw him face a setting that demanded quick calculations and unwavering poise. The host's mastery of timing and data-driven challenges created a stark contrast to Mamdani's reactive posture, and that contrast shaped how the audience processed the encounter. Public perception in such high-stakes moments isn't shaped merely by facts. It is sculpted by tone, rhythm, and the impression of who is leading and who is trailing behind. The segment also highlighted the shifting role of financial news networks in the broader media landscape. Once considered niche outlets for investors and policy wonks, these platforms now function as gatekeepers of legitimacy. Appearing on CNBC is not only about speaking to experts, it is about proving credibility to the mainstream. For Mamdani, the platform was an opportunity to project his ideas to a national audience. But the outcome instead reinforced the perception that he was out of depth when pressed outside of activist rhetoric. This dynamic illustrates how media spaces themselves have become arenas of power, where narratives can be elevated or dismantled in real time, depending on how well a figure navigates the challenges posed by seasoned hosts. The incident left behind an undeniable sense of theater mixed with revelation. It wasn't staged, yet it unfolded with the tension and resolution of a scripted scene. The host's calm dismantling of Mamdani's arguments gave viewers a performance of authority, while Mamdani's faltering responses revealed the costs of unpreparedness. For those watching closely, it was a glimpse into the unforgiving nature of modern political media, where a single segment can alter trajectories, and where humiliation becomes not just personal, but emblematic of broader struggles between insurgent politics and entrenched institutions. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on CNBC humiliating Zohran Mamdani? Fair or biased? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.